Secret Origins, established in 1986, helped build the mythos of the new DC universe after the reality-altering events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. These range from straightforward origin stories of absurd characters to one-off stories starring characters without their own title. In this series' special issue, the attention turned to three of Batman's most iconic foes. While the Penguin and Two-Face stories are well done and offer different looks at the characters, it's the Riddler story sandwiched in between that captivates me. The framing device for the issue sees a film crew trying to make a documentary that showcases the human side of the costumed criminals that plague Gotham City. After many dead ends, including the Batman himself warning them that they're in danger, they finally lock down an interview with the recently released from prison Riddler. They meet him at the Finger Yard, named after Batman and Riddler co-creator Bill Finger, shown to be a graveyard for all the oversized contraptions the villains had used over the years. Interestingly, it's hinted that most, if not all of them, were made by an advertising company that had fallen by the wayside. Once they're all there and the interview starts, it's quickly derailed by Riddler's monologuing and, well, riddling. I won't recite the entire monologue because I won't do it justice, and you should really just check it out for yourself. Regardless, the whole story sees the Riddler reminiscing about the good old days, caught in his own rabbit hole of nostalgia. The history he talks about is very particular though, one that may not have even existed for this version of the character. The Riddler paints a picture of a more wholesome crime spree, one defined by mischief as opposed to violence. He even seems repulsed at the idea of the Joker killing. It's not difficult to see that he's pining over the comics of the late 50s through early 70s, when Batman comics were allowed to be sillier. It's even less difficult to see that this is a vaguely disguised opinion on comics in general, which had been trending darker in tone for at least a decade when this comic came out. Using the Riddler for this critique is genius. None of Batman's enemies benefited from the peak of campiness quite like the Riddler. After disappearing from comics for several years after only a few Golden Age appearances, when he came back in 1965, he was almost immediately skyrocketed into pop culture glory with his appearance in the Adam West Batman series, which this story also hints at. After half a decade of being one of the most iconic characters in the medium, the Riddler was once again relegated to the back burner, a fate that only he suffered despite other villains also being featured in the series. The Riddler was a camp star, on the top of a goofy world that celebrated his outlandish gimmicks and motifs. Unlike the rest of Batman's iconic villains, the Riddler may have already definitively peaked, at least in terms of popularity. While he hasn't disappeared from comics entirely, not to the extent of previous lapses, it does sometimes feel that they're at a loss of what exactly to do with him. He's been an informant, a mastermind, a reformed ally, he's run the gamut and yet never again reached the lofty heights of stardom that he enjoyed in his heyday. Contrast this to the Joker, who, if anything, has seen an increase in popularity in the last 50 years. Maybe the Joker was able to make the leap to more serious fare easier than the Riddler. Maybe the gimmick was too much. Maybe the costume too garish. This was one of the last times we'd see the question mark spandex, later iterations opting instead for the suit, which made his comic debut in this story. Taken in this context, it almost feels like a farewell to this version of the character. Cementing this idea is the fact that in the following decade, Edward Nygma would be retconned as a persona instead of being his real name, which would now be Eddie Nashton. This final shift to give the character a bit more realism is probably the final nail in the coffin for the original Riddler. Perhaps this story should be seen as the swan song for the classic Edward Nygma, in the way that Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow is the ending for the Silver Age Superman. Here we leave a man who just couldn't get past the good old days, a forgotten relic in a graveyard of antiques, a man who used to command attention with ease, left wondering when everything changed. Hope you like this short video. There are more like it on my channel, even more on the way, so subscribe if you like it. This has been Tales to Showcase. I've been the Watcher of New Earth, and I hope to see you in the next video.